country-by-country assessment of internet freedom, which we define as the simple notion that the rights and protections we all enjoy offline should be protected online. The Freedom on the Net report looks at how easily people can access the internet, whether it's censored, and how their fundamental rights of free expression and privacy are restricted. We examined 70 countries around the world, and that translates to about 89% of the world's internet users. Today, we'll be diving into developments in a number of our Southeast Asian countries with this fantastic panel of partners. First up here, we have Kelly Ko, who's the program officer at Sinar Project, a civic tech initiative using open technology, open data, and policy analysis to systematically make important information public and more accessible to the Malaysian people. And Kelly will be speaking to developments in Malaysia. We also have Letitia Visan, who's Human Rights Research and Advocacy Officer at Manusha Foundation, an intersectional feminist organization reinforcing the power of humans, and particularly local communities and women human rights defenders, to fight for human rights, equality, and justice. We also have Nendan S. Arum, who is head of the Free Expression Division at the Southeast Asia Freedom of Expression Network, known as SafeNet. SafeNet's vision is the realization of a digital space that upholds human rights values for all. And last but not least, Oliver Spencer is here from Free Expression Myanmar, which was founded in 2017 to defend the right to freedom of expression and information in Myanmar. I'd also like to thank the hosts for this event, Free Expression Myanmar, Manusha Foundation, and SafeNet. Thank you all for your work in making this possible. Now, we'll dive in a bit with each of our panelists in developments in their countries of coverage, and we'll also talk about some of the themes across the region. We have the Zoom Q&A function open and time reserved at the end to answer any questions that come up. So please do hop in there to ask the questions that are on your mind. And finally, to read more about Freedom on the Net, to dive into the country profiles that these panelists have worked on, you can visit freedomonthenet.org and also get in touch with us, of course, as questions arise in the future. Now, Oliver, let's start by talking about Myanmar. Since the February 2021 coup, the military has launched a brutal agenda of repression, including in online spaces. What's the picture for internet freedom in Myanmar now?
Well, thanks very much for having me. I just wanted to send some apologies from my colleague Yinadna Dane, who, due to emergencies inside Myanmar, couldn't attend. So I'm here for you. So basically, we can sort of explain what's happening in Myanmar through 3 phases of the military's engagement with the online internet space. The first phase, which was immediately after the coup on 1st of February 2021, was a bit like a hammer. So they just took a hammer to the internet. They shut down all access. They just smashed everything immediately. That phase lasted probably on and off for the first month, perhaps. And then they started shifting to a second phase. So we're talking sort of April 2021. This was the search and destroy phase. Sorry, I'm using military language here because obviously they are a military and this is how they think. So they began to reopen some limited and irregular internet access while trying to then identify and silence dissenters. So they moved from the hammer to a more targeted approach. Right now we're in the third phase, and this sort of started earlier this year. And this has really been about them maximizing their digital opportunities to increase overt and covert surveillance intended to strike fear into the public. To give you an idea of how that plays in the current situation, I mean, you can no longer speak openly about anything that could be even remotely political online unless you do so using pseudonyms. If you speak openly about anything relating to anything about the military openly, then you will have big problems. We're also seeing that doxing is common, particularly on Telegram. So individuals and often their families are outed on Telegram and targeted, and people say where they live, what they've been doing, what they've been saying or thinking, obviously with the intention that that person then gets targeted offline. And then also we've got internet shutdowns that are still continuing across the country, some of which are just total shutdowns, and some of which are 2G. Basically, they leave 2G running. And these are obviously targeted mainly around where the dissent is greatest. So it's clearly linked to the offline conflict. And then finally, what we've been seeing over the past couple of months is really the telecoms companies being forced to re-register people's SIM cards. So this is really, like heightened surveillance, because they want ID cards re-registered against all SIM cards, and the telecoms companies are now rolling that out to add to to increase the level of fear that there is around using the internet. So hopefully that's enough as an intro.
Thanks, Oliver. I mean, it's a dark picture, and I'm sure we can dive into more of those developments in greater detail later in the conversation. For now, we've also seen digital repression escalating in Thailand. So I want to go to Letitia. And of course, this is particularly since the pro-democracy protests started in July 2020. Letitia, what major developments have you noted in sort of this overall environment since July 2020?
Thank you very much, Kian. Yes, indeed, since the pro-democracy protests that started in July 2020, authorities have significantly increased the use of repressive laws, and in particular, the lèse-majesté law, which is Section 112 of the Criminal Code, which prohibits the insult or defamation of the royal family, and sedition to prosecute online expression. And in fact, at the end of 2020, as a direct response to the pro-democracy movement, the use of Section 112 was revived after 2 years of moratorium on its use. And of course, since then, the law has been used to limit anti-royal opinions, including online. And the consequence is that the number of cases started by this law has increased a lot. Just to give you an idea, within less than 2 years, more than 200 people were hit with criminal charges under the law. And half of these lèse-majesté lawsuits resulted from people's online expression. The year 2021 was by no means a better year. It started with very bad news and ended pretty much the same way. At the beginning of the year, we had the most draconian sentence ever under Section 112 that was handed to a former revenue officer. And she was initially sentenced to 87 years for uploading on YouTube some audio clips of radio hosts who criticized the monarchy. Later, the sentence was reduced, but only by half, and that was after she pleaded guilty. And as I was saying, we ended the year in a bad way, because we had a constitutional court ruling which happened on the exact same day of the third Universal Periodic Review of Thailand. And so the constitutional court ruled that activist calls for monarchy reform constitute an attempt to overthrow the monarchy. They were not punished, but they were ordered to stop further actions in this matter. And of course, this set a very dangerous legal precedent for Thailand that may have a devastating impact on the verdicts on lèse-majesté cases and also on online speech. And it also showed that Thailand, first, is not respecting its international human rights obligations and has no intention to do so. And I would say that what's even more is that in the wake of this ruling, the National Broadcasting and Telecommunications Commission of Thailand warned the media against covering the pro-democracy protests, or otherwise they could face criminal prosecution, which naturally led to self-censorship by media and users. Now, in 2022, the government is still suppressing online freedoms and is intimidating and harassing pro-democracy activists and dissenting voices. And of course, it has many, many tools to do it. And one of them is through the use of surveillance technologies. And a report from July of this year revealed that the government deployed Pegasus spyware against pro-democracy activists, human rights defenders, and academics, among others. There were many others targeted. And in a very, very recent development, just from last week on the 15th of November, for the first time in Southeast Asia, 8 Thai citizens sued NSO Group, which is the Israeli company that has developed and licensed the Pegasus spyware. And so the citizens sued the group for the spyware infections they suffered in the past years, in 20 and 2021. And we can see later, what could be the effects of the potential, ruling of the court. And now, last thing I'd like to mention from this year is the approval by the cabinet of the latest version of a bill for civil society activities, which is also known as draft NGO law or MPO law, which may also have a significant impact on people's rights to freedom of expression and association online.
Thanks, Letitia. There's so much to dive in there. I mean, I'm always, it's very inspiring to see people suing these spyware companies to hold them to account for their abuses. I really hope we see some good news on that front to come. Nenden, let's turn to you next to talk about internet freedom in Indonesia. What have you found over the past year about the picture for human rights online?
Yeah, actually it's quite similar with Thailand and Myanmar, even though we are not worse than those countries, but actually, yes, we still have a continuously trends about the internet freedom under threat in Indonesia. So we still found that there is a internet disruption in Papua and the other places where the mass protest is happen actually. So the internet disruption is oftenly happen alongside with the government activities in some area. So yeah, we can suspect it. Yeah, we can suspect it if the internet disruption is have anything with the government activities. And in some places, it's not only about the internet disruption, not only about the internet shutdown, but also the cut off of the electricity. So in some places, yeah, they cannot access the electricity and of course the internet as well. And then we can see since the last year until now, actually the trends of the judicial harassment targeted the activists and journalists, and also the internet users through the ITE law, the criminalization through the ITE law with the defamation articles is rising. I mean, like a lot of people reported to the police just because their posts in the social media, just because they criticize the government, or even they just like, have kind of like a review for some products in the social media, but and then it reported to the police because maybe the company or even the government not really like about that comment. So for this year, actually, SafeNet noted it's almost 100 cases about this criminalization or the judicial harassment about this defamation in social media. And of course, this number is also create kind of like a chilling effect and make a lot of people feel to have a self-censorship. So yeah, it will affect to our freedom of expression online. Yeah, and then besides that, a lot of like journalists and activists as well not only reported to the police, but also they attack digitally. A lot of like activists have kind of like their account is taken over by someone, and then they also post kind of like impersonation and framing content about that activist or journalist, and then doxing itself. So a lot of like personal information that published on social media, and then frame that this journalist is someone who against the government or someone who against some issues, and then people will troll the journalist or the activist itself. And also the last year's finding is also Indonesian government is suspected of buying a spyware as well. So I think it's also related to what happened now when a lot of like the hacking and the account taking over for the activists and journalists. Maybe it related, but yeah, I don't see any good development actually this year as well. So yeah, yeah, actually that's what happened in Indonesia like right now, Kian.
Nandan, I look forward to the day where we can have one of these panels and we're only talking about good developments. One day, that day will come. Let's close out this sort of regional roundup with Malaysia. Kelly, what are the sort of big stories for human rights online in Malaysia over the past year?
Thank you, Kian. So for the past year, we see a continued trend of arrests of internet users for their online speech, especially on criticisms against the monarchy, the ruling government, and also against the religion Islam. So we've seen Fahmi Reza from 2021 to July 2022. He was investigated 11 times for different artworks that he posted and uploaded on social media. So these contents touch on various contents on politicians, against politicians, royalty, and also the religion. And out of these, 2 cases proceeded to court. And just in a rather good news, I would say last month he was found that in the case involving the social media posting of a picture with 2 green beer cans held by 2 hands. So one hand has this Carlsberg text on it, and the other has what appears to be a logo of the Malaysian Islamic Party, PAS. And in this artwork itself, the Sessions Court actually granted a discharge not amounting to an acquittal. So on the reason that the charge was baseless, groundless, and defective. However, because it is a discharge not amounting to an acquittal, he still faces the risk of being charged over the same offense in the future if the prosecution decides to charge him again. And for the other case that was back in August, which also the court granted a DNAA, this case involved his social media post about the health ministry relaxing the quarantine rules last year for Malaysian ministers traveling back from overseas trips. So his post was deemed to be insulting the then health minister. And these 2 cases, he was charged under the same section, which is the section 233 of the Communications and Multimedia Act for the offense of improper use of network facilities to make an obscene posting with the intent to annoy another person. So if found guilty, he may be fined up to 50,000 ringgit Malaysia or jail up to a year or both. So we've seen activists being affected, and civil society members are also not spared because members involving in the production and launch of this animated short film called Chili Powder and Thinner, highlighting the issues of police brutality. The members involved were investigated, had their houses raided, offices raided, devices confiscated. So even a journalist covering the launch of the short film was also investigated. And moving on, we also seen in the creative scene, artists are not spared. If their work they are involved in show elements of homosexuality or cross-dressing, like during the coverage period, we see artists involved in the music videos of the Hari Raya Aidilfitri, which is the holiday of breaking the fast for the Muslims. These songs were being investigated for involving male dancers displaying effeminate behavior and cross-dressers in the music video. So, and this video uploaded on YouTube, and the artists were being investigated under Section 233 as well. One of them, which is reported just a few weeks ago, she was pleaded not guilty, and she was accused of committing the offense through YouTube. So we will continue to monitor what will be progressing after this. And politicians belonging to opposition, similarly, they were investigated over videos posted on TikTok. We also see defamation suits being filed by politicians against news medias and journalists for articles published online. So these are the bigger stories of human rights online in Malaysia.
Kelly, thanks for diving into those cases and for those really really compelling stories of folks who are experiencing this kind of targeted repression. I'm actually kind of glad that you illustrated some of these egregious cases, because I want to ask, all of our panelists to sort of do the same. As we've discussed with Section 112 in Thailand and the ITE law in Indonesia, people across the region are being targeted for their online expression. And we actually found that in all of the Southeast Asian countries covered by Freedom on the Net 2022, officials arrested people for discussing political, social, or religious topics online. So panelists, and here I'll leave this open-ended and invite any of you to hop in. Who is being targeted in your countries? Who are authorities seeking to arrest and sentence to prison? And what are some of these egregious cases that we should know about to understand what it looks like to be targeted for online expression in these countries?
Okay,
You go and then.
okay, sorry. Yeah, actually, in Indonesia, mostly targeted is to the common people like us. Actually, like anyone who just like posts in the internet to express their opinion regarding the government regulation or so on, it can easily tracked down and then arrested to the police actually. And then the police is just said they will have kind of like the user only need to say sorry publicly, and then they will release it. Actually, it's kind of like intimidation, you just like common people just arrested to the police. It's kind of like intimidation. And then in the sophisticated cases, actually a lot of also the activists in the political momentum in Indonesia, not as easy as arrested to the police, but mostly of them kind of like have kind of like this digital attack massively, and then yeah, mostly it's just about the criticize the government policy. Yeah, so I think in the other cases is actually about one advocate, a public advocate, I guess. He just said that the court is kind of like a lot of corruption in court, and then he publicly uploaded in the YouTube because he have that opinion. And then after that, the court all over in Indonesia, I think more than 20 court is like suing him. So this advocate is reported to the police by the prosecutor and the advocate in that court. So it also like not the cases rising a lot about this IT law in Indonesia, just because this opinion from the advocate, and then it creates kind of like a report to the police, more than 20, I think.
Thank you, Nandan. Letitia, please, I saw you unmute.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Nandan. And yeah, I will start by saying that in Thailand, speaking about the monarchy and demands for monarchical reform are the main targets for arrest and sentencing. And that's because the demand for monarchy reform is extremely radical and also controversial, since the royal institution has hardly ever been subjected to public scrutiny. So from pro-democracy activists to journalists to human rights defenders to ordinary users, many people are charged and imprisoned simply for their online speech, critical, or, and I would like to emphasize here, thought to be critical of the monarchy, the administration, so on and so forth. And for instance, there are loads of pro-democracy activists arrested and charged with lèse-majesté and sedition, and also under the Computer Crime Act. And many of them face multiple criminal charges and might receive sentences that range from 1 to 300 years. And of course, there are many cases. I have in mind 2 cases. For instance, student activist Pari Chiwarak, who is also known as Penguin, if convicted of all charges under the Computer Crime Act, Section 112, and sedition, could spend up to 300 years in prison. But this is not an isolated case. And there's also, for instance, the case of student activist Panusaya, also known as Rung, who, by the way, thanks to her activism, she was named among BBC's 100 women in 2020. And this is a list highlighting women who are making a difference in the world. So she was arrested and charged with sedition and violating the Computer Crime Act for running the Facebook page of a student-led pro-democracy group. And she could likewise be imprisoned for more than 100 years.
So Myanmar cannot compete with Thailand on the 300 years imprisonment, but maybe the Myanmar military is looking to that as a role model. But what I can say for Myanmar is that when we did an investigation earlier this year, we found 4,000 cases of individuals that had been criminalized for speech crimes, and we guessed that there were probably 10,000 in total, but we couldn't find enough evidence and enough information. Sorry, and the reason being is that all of the courts in Myanmar are secret; they're all closed. Even the allegedly civilian courts operate inside prisons and are closed to everyone, including families and so forth. Although we can identify them as speech crimes because of the the provision that they are prosecuted under, we don't know any details about the cases, barring what some families may say in the media. And that's part of the problem in Myanmar, is just that it's so everything is so hidden. Everything is sort of guesswork about what actually the underlying allegation is, if there even is one. I think one thing to note is what Nenden was saying as well, is that in Myanmar at the beginning of the coup, most of the detentions were quite targeted, and they were looking for influencers effectively. But as the rule of law completely broke down, what you've seen is also just an explosion of like petty conflicts. So, for example, say at the township level, one person, an administrator has a conflict with somebody else, they will use the crimes that are easiest to get a conviction or easiest to pull the military into supporting. And so, these kind of digital speech related crimes are very easy. And that's why we've seen such an explosion of these sort of really small arbitrary cases, as well as the larger influencer cases. But, best case scenario, or best guess rather, I would say probably 4,000 or 5,000 cases, probably.
Yes, I would also like to share a bit on Malaysia. I think we can't really compare with Myanmar and what happened in Thailand, but we do see some of the indirect harassment for expressing online. Say, take for example, Fahmi Reza's case. So one of his most controversial artwork posted on social media depicted a monkey in royal attire. So he was arrested and charged under Sedition Act due to sedition's tendency, and also under the Section 233 in less than 15 hours after posting. And he proceeded to turn the artwork into NFT for sale. The NFT site itself was blocked. And around the same period of time, he attempted to renew his passport and was found out he was barred by the immigration department from leaving the country. But fortunately, the travel ban was subsequently lifted. So we are not just looking at the investigation itself, but there are also some indirect influences that comes into play when expressing online, and the consequence to bear for general online users. Thank you. Back to you, Kian.
No, thank you all for illustrating these cases. I mean, it's certainly a really dark picture, and to Oliver's point, I think, as always with these cases, there's the very real possibility that authorities are learning from each other and how to target people and in what circumstances. And I think going after people who are making political NFT art may be a sort of cutting edge of digital repression, though we can all hold our bets on whether the NFT boom is a trend that will hold over the course of the next few years. I want to turn to a sort of another avenue of digital repression and looking at how governments are using regulation to enforce their agendas. But before I do, I want to remind our attendees, we have the Zoom Q&A open. I have some good questions coming through. Encourage you to post questions that are on your mind there, and we'll turn to those in just a few minutes. So, Nandan, we saw over the summer that the Indonesian government blocked PayPal, Yahoo, I think the gaming platform Steam, several other websites, while seeking to enforce a new law that would expand, well, an older law that would expand the government's control over content on those platforms. Tell us a bit about what happened there and how the law has been enforced since those blocks took place.
Okay, thank you, Kian. Right, Indonesian Ministry of Communication and Information block several platforms because they didn't register to Indonesia under the Minister Regulation number 5 on private electronic system operators. So this regulation actually obligate all the digital platform that has service in Indonesia to register to make sure that government easy to control them actually. So yeah, in the end of July, around 10 platform, around 10 from 100 biggest traffic platform in Indonesia didn't register, so that the government just blocked that platform digital. And then after that, a lot of like protests from the internet users because they cannot access their fund in the PayPal, they can access the account on their stream or game game streaming. And then this protest is quite viral in social media and makes the government and then unblock the platform eventually. Even though after that, the government tried to communicate to the platform digital, and then the digital platform registered to government, and then it's unblocked until now. So actually, there's no significant development after that. After the unblocking of the platform digital, but the civil society still monitoring for the progress of the implementation, because we know this regulation is not only about the registration, but also we know that a lot of articles that can impact to the wider censorship in Indonesia, because this regulation said that digital platform should take down or remove the content that can create kind of like mass disorder or public disorder, so on. And it's a really problematic article. And then we know from the experience, this kind of like articles will easily abused by the government to targeted people that speak up and criticize the government. So yeah, we still monitoring the development.
Thanks for updating on that, Nandan. And I think this narrative you illustrated of how governments use sort of registration of technology companies to enforce control and then leverage that control over individual internet users is one that we're seeing around the world. Letitia, Kelly, Oliver, how else have you seen authorities seeking to use regulation over technology companies and maybe service providers to expand their control over what people are posting and how they're expressing themselves online?
Maybe I can start first. So back in 2021, in December, the ministry did admit that they find it challenging to control and regulate content on online streaming platforms like Netflix, because the current legislation can only regulate companies that are registered in Malaysia. So the challenge to regulate streaming platforms that are not unique, not just streaming platforms, but also some websites that are not unique to Malaysia alone, it would be a problem for Malaysia because we do not have the legislation to enable them to have control over it. However, we do have something called a content code. This content code is released, governed by the Ministry of Communications and Multimedia. And in May 2022, a new content code was released. What it means is that this content code helps to outline the procedures for self-regulations by setting out the governing standards and also best practices for content dissemination. So in a way, it helps to identify offensive and objectionable content for the content providers, and also within the context of the social values of the country. This is because if you look at the section 211 of the CMA, it states that it's an offense for content provider to have content that is indecent, obscene, false, and offensive with the intent to annoy, abuse, threaten, or harass any person. So this content code itself, it facilitates the interpretation of these offenses. But we are not seeing anything very alarming so far. So we will continue to monitor how it works. Thank you.
I think for Myanmar, I think the military sort of understands that they have less control over the platforms, given their jurisdictions that they're in. So the military are targeting have targeted regulation at basically preventing any anonymity, or at least attacking privacy. And they do this through their regulation of the telecoms companies in trying to basically hunt down. So you're free to say something, but you're not generally free after you've said it. It's, I guess, their sort of strategy.
And I would say that also in Thailand, the breadth of censorship is constantly growing. So be it through the ways that I mentioned before, or through this, let's say, classic authoritarian tactic, which is to block access to content and even remove it. And of course, in Thailand, there are laws in place that allow authorities to block websites and content on different grounds. But what's really widespread is the blocking of content considered critical of the monarchy. And to give you an example, this year in February, a website hosting an online petition to repeal the lèse-majesté law was blocked. And another thing that I believe it's worthy mentioning is that in these efforts of the government to control the information available online, it is not alone, because the government has been assisted by tech companies which complied on many occasions with such requests from the government. So I believe that, while it's true that the government is making requests, it's also true that the companies are helping the authoritarian governments.
This is really, really good points all around. And I think, you've all illustrated all of the different ways that governments are asserting pressure points on companies who are somewhere in the content pipeline. And to Letitia's point, I think that really just brings home how important it is for companies to be prepared to go to the mat to protect their users. And this is true for the sort of the tech giants that we know are active in this space, all the way down to these smaller platforms that may not have the regulatory teams spun up to respond to, say, requests from the Indonesian government to block a certain game on Steam. So these smaller platforms really need to understand that this is coming their way. Listen, this has been a fantastic discussion. I'm going to pull in some of our audience questions here. We have some really, really great questions coming in. And apologies in advance, audience members, if I mispronounce any of your names. Serkan asks, how can ordinary non-technical people be educated in terms of proactive privacy measures, like end-to-end encryption, or how to refrain from sharing more than enough personal information online? So I wonder here if we could talk a bit about sort of best practices for people who are sort of using these platforms, and also maybe talking about the threats to online privacy in the countries of your coverage. Perhaps, Nandan, I saw you nodding. May I go to you first?
Okay, thank you, Serkan, for the question. So actually, SafeNet in the past few years actively giving some training for the digital security and yeah, even though we still targeted to the activists and journalists and other minority community, but we also publish kind of like tips and tricks on our social media about the importance of we are protect our privacy, and then how not to overshare everything. So actually it's, I don't know if we can say it's a blessing in disguise when a lot of like cases in Indonesia regarding the privacy. I mean, like a lot of people, their ID is abused by some bad guy to register to kind of like a loan, online loan, and then yeah, a lot of people become victims, and then since then Indonesian people quite aware about the importance of this privacy and to protect the ID. So far what we did by the educate people is start from the cases. Actually it's kind of bitter, but it works. I mean, like you can see about the worst case scenario, and then we can say how to not to become the next victim and so on. But yeah, we also need to find another way that not doing some harm for this education actually. So yeah, that's what SafeNet did in the past few years.
Listen, so the first piece of advice is to follow SafeNet on social media and attend all of their excellent trainings. Perhaps Letitia, over to you, and then to Oliver, please.
Thank you, Kian. Then maybe the second advice is to follow Manusia and the ASEAN Regional Coalition to stop digital dictatorship. SafeNet is actually part of the coalition, and the aim is to fight against rising digital dictatorship in the region. And of course, we work together towards many goals, but one of them is also to raise awareness of and build capacity on digital rights. So we organize webinars, workshops where we talk about let's say the threats to digital rights and how netizens could protect themselves. So yeah, and we also use we have an online social media campaign. We use the hashtag Stop Digital Dictatorship, and with this hashtag we share a lot of cases of human rights violations, as Nandan was saying, and we invite people, you know, to educate themselves or to follow the post to know more about the threats to digital rights.
So Free Expression Myanmar is a policy organization rather than a training organization. But what I would say is that what we found since the coup and even before that in regards to the Rohingya is that actually, you know, that there are limitations to what we can ideally teach people to you know, help people learn, and a lot of this question comes down to what hasn't been spoken yet about this evening, which is about the responsibilities of the companies themselves. So I think from our point of view, one answer to this question is actually the companies themselves should not be facilitating violations of the right to privacy. You know, and companies themselves, you know, we engage with all of them. Some of them are much better than others. Some of them are just terrible, and that's generally. So when it comes down to privacy specifically, I mean, there's so much more that they can do. But the problem, of course, at the end of the day, is that they profit from invading people's privacy. So I guess when it comes to non-technical people, I guess, you know, it's really about encouraging the companies to make protecting your privacy not a technical question, but rather a default where, you know, those of us like myself who try not to use platforms that will obviously sell your data, you know, we are not forced to have to learn about which platforms are doing what, but actually that these platforms protect privacy themselves.
Thanks, Oliver. I just want to hop in with a short point. So SINA project, like Free Expression Myanmar, we are not a training organization, but from my experience, I think before we talk about teaching ordinary people on end-to-end encryption or sharing personal information, we have to think about digital literacy, because there's no point to teach them end-to-end encryption if they do not really know how to use a proper smartphone. So if this is not being educated, or maybe have normal smartphone classes to teach maybe your elderly parents or your grandparents about the importance of privacy and data and not overshare on social media, it does not work. We have to start from the ground, I believe. Yes, thank you.
No, thank you, Kelly, and thank you all. I mean, I think that was a fantastic array of answers, starting from the sort of micro response to the question all the way up to the broader environment. Very, very well appreciated. Next up, we have a really great question from Manojna that I will, with apologies, summarize a bit for brevity, about fake news laws. So we saw many of these laws passed across the region seeking to target false information about the pandemic. Manojna asks, are these still important to look at in what we hope is a post-pandemic world? And I'll also kind of add on, where do we go from here in sort of the broader environment when governments are passing these laws targeting false health information? Is it good? Is it bad? What opportunities do we have? And I may start with Kelly, because I know we had some major developments in Malaysia here on this front.
Sorry, can you please repeat that again?
Yeah, so about laws seeking to criminalize false information about COVID-19 and the pandemic.
Okay, so I just want to state maybe to explain that the fake news law, we did have it back then. We have an anti-fake news law, but it was taken down. It was no longer in place. And during COVID-19, we did also have a temporary emergency ordinance to combat the fake news around COVID-19. And that itself is no longer in place after the end of emergency, 6 months after. So right now, we do not really have a law that governs fake news in Malaysia itself. And it's because of that, we do see a lot of rise of fake news, especially around elections periods and also even day to day. And it really falls back on some of the organizations that do fact checking to try to manage the situation for the current situation. And thank you, Kian.
Letitia, Nandan, Oliver, any points to any interventions on this front?
Okay, maybe I can add something. In Indonesia, actually, we don't have a specific fake news law, but it's happened in the penal code in Indonesia. So about the spreading of the false information. So it also this article is also in our revision of penal code, and then we see if this article pass, it possibly will be also potentially abused for in the political momentum, because into 2024 Indonesia will have a public election. We will have election, and then this rule of the false information will be easily abused to just label hoax for something news or any articles or any content that maybe dissent or against the rule government. So we still monitoring, and it's still very important to monitor about this development about the fake news, even or the false information law post-pandemic and after that, because it's not about the pandemic itself, but it's also more to political matters in Indonesia. So yes, Ken.
Please, Letitia.
Thank you, Kian. Yeah, also in Thailand, we have one anti-fake news center that I would say it's for fake news in general. And then during the pandemic in May 2021, a second center was established under the Ministry of Justice, under the Department of Special Investigation. And this has the specific mandate to investigate attempts to spread false news online that were thought to mislead the public about the COVID-19 situation. while the emergency decree is not into force anymore, we still have the fake news, the one established in 2019, in November 2019, and given the very broad scope of the mandate of the center, and also the lack of clear definition of fake news, it of course could be used to target critical dissent. And we also, during the emergency decree, when that one was in place, we also had the regulation 29, which was basically aimed to consider fake news, anything, like the provisions were so vague that everything could actually fall under the definition, let's say, of fake news. Fortunately, and again, in that case, we saw how civil society groups filed a lawsuit against the prime minister, and the civil court issued that this regulation was vague and could affect freedom of expression and press, which are guaranteed by the constitution. So it was like the government couldn't enforce it. But that is an example, and we can kind of imagine how things could be in the future. So yeah, and also the court in that case ruled that access to internet services is an important communication channel for society, which was of course a positive step for the respect of freedom of expression.
Thank you all for those responses. I think it really illustrates the sort of span of how these health misinformation laws can be abused by authorities that are seeking to curtail criticism of government handling of the pandemic, for instance, which our Freedom on the Net 2020 analysis kind of tracked developments and sort of these abuses of COVID-19 misinformation laws around the world, and certainly saw many instances where governments use these to crack down on dissent and other forms of online expression. So I think it's really important that these laws are being rolled back as the worst of the pandemic, hopefully the worst of the pandemic is transitioned out. And it's, of course, health misinformation is still a serious problem online, and I think there's a range of other interventions to take to fight back against that misinformation. Now, unfortunately, we have only a few minutes to close, and we still have some great questions in the Q&A panel. So apologies to our audience members whose questions we're not going to be able to get to. I want to close in just our brief minutes by maybe looking to whether there's any room for sort of optimism in the picture for internet freedom and human rights online in Southeast Asia. Let's do a speed round for each of you. Let's reflect on sort of good news and opportunities. I mean, our Freedom on the Net 2022 global analysis found that the fight against digital repression is starting to yield results, and we are seeing the tide turning in some very specific contexts. And often it's civil society organizations like all of yours who are leading the charge. So just quickly going around the room, how have you seen this in your work, and where do you, and if you haven't seen any good news recently, where do you see opportunities ahead? Let's start with Letitia.
Yeah, so I just mentioned before, that there are some good news. And I would say that maybe the good news is that while the digital dictatorship is ever growing, so is the resistance from civil society. So I shared with you before the case about this regulation that the civil court issued an emergency order prohibiting the prime minister from enforcing the regulation, and actually said that, access to internet services is an important communication channel for society. So I really see it as a positive step. And there is also the civil lawsuit that I mentioned before, filed by the Thai citizens against the NSO group, which again shows that, that the resistance from civil society is growing. In this case, if the court rules in their favor, in the favor of the citizens, it would really send a strong message that fundamental rights are respected. So these are great examples which give us hope, or at least they give me hope. And I believe that in Southeast Asia, we should keep naming and shaming authoritarian governments and keep building solidarity as a form of resistance.
Thank you, Letitia. Let's do just in quick order, Nandan, Oliver, and then Kelly to wrap us up.
Okay, so quite similar in Indonesia. The importance of digital civic space now being like everyone already aware about the importance of digital civic space, and then almost all of the civil society already have the focus on how to save the internet freedom and also the digital rights. So it's kind of like a positive development. And then we also started to create a new coalition. We called it Digital Democracy Resilience Network. So this is we have kind of like a lot of like civil society in this network, and then we have an objective to protect the digital democracy, and then with this solidarity, with this collaboration, and then not only in Indonesia and also in the region, it will be a very good step. It will be a very positive impact for the future internet freedom, I guess.
I think for Myanmar, the best thing is if we compare the 1988 coup to the 2021 coup, we see a huge difference and that's driven by the digital space. The difference being in the early 90s and late 80s, for the people of Myanmar to know what was happening in their own country, they needed to get an illegal radio and get an illegal radio broadcast. In 2021, they can log on with a VPN. They can dissent online anonymously. They can access information about their own country. So the situation has, maybe the response from the global community has been exactly the same as previously, but the actual people within Myanmar have access to information that they've never had previously.
I am on a pessimist side of way looking at it, because I'm afraid civic space could be going towards a narrowing trend, because we just had an election on Saturday and we still do not know who will be the new government, and the possible candidate for the prime minister has vowed to protect Sedition Act, because it protects like position of Malay rulers, special rights of Bumiputras, and Islam being the official religion, and so on, and also the language of Bahasa Malaysia as the official language. So we could be going towards a more conservative government. So this is a bit worrying for us, but positive part is comparatively Malaysia still has the rule of law and not subject to laws as strict as Thailand and others in the region. Yes, thank you.
Well, on that note, we'll end our panel. Thank you all so much for your fantastic contributions, and thank you to all of our attendees for chiming in. To learn more, please check out our various websites. You can find Nenden and SafeNet's work, Letitia at Manusha Foundation, Oliver with Free Expression Myanmar, and Kelly with Sinar Project. And of course, to read our Freedom on the Net analysis for 2022, visit freedomonthenet.org. It's a real pleasure to speak with all of you. I know we could spend many more minutes in this room getting into the details. But with this, we'll close it out and wish you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.